My name is Glenn Valdez. I'm actually from Long Island, New York. My parents, though, immigrated from the Philippines in 1966. My parents' names are Leon and Rose Valdez, and again, they came here from the Philippines in the 1960s. And part of the significance in our family with that is they were amongst the first wave of immigrants who came over after the passage of the Hart-Celler Act, when immigration really opened up a lot more. So there was a lot of opportunity for them than what other Asian Americans or Asians may have had in the past. Growing up as a first generation born in America to immigrant parents, I would say that my childhood was almost like it was split into two different worlds. That I had my family and the Filipino culture and all of the things that went along with that. But of course, the food was an ever-present thing. Family, and especially extended family, were a big part of my upbringing. But there was also kind of a little bit of a disconnect when I went to school and was around my friends there, just because the culture was different from what I would have at home. My Filipino identity wasn't really there, as in getting lumped together in the big Asian American monolith that all Asian cultures are alike, and not really having the understanding of the differences that are there and what Filipino culture is really like. It's not as if it was an issue, it's just sometimes it's nice to not have to explain everything, and there's a little bit of a comfort in the whole implicit part of things, that you know what the culture is about. We used to have bake sales to raise money for school, and there was one year where I just decided, all right, I was going to bring puto for the bake sale, and everybody loved it. Especially to the point where they would be asking the next year, oh, so are you bringing that again? So are you bringing that again? Like, that was probably the number one thing that everybody wanted. A lot of times my friends would ask if, what was for dinner? And they would want to come over for dinner because it was something that was very different for them. So there was also those pluses when it kind of came to blending the two worlds, is that, yeah, I had this uniqueness and it was different, but it was never different in a bad way. It was, in a lot of ways, my friends thought it was different in a very cool way and wanted to learn more about that. People not really recognizing Filipino identity. It being lumped in with many other Asian cultures, especially ones that are more prominent in, let's say, media and TV. It's not as, let's say, seen of a culture, and not a lot of representation that you would see with Filipino culture much more generally. So yeah, if you try, what's my favorite Filipino dish is whatever is in front of me at the time. I'll go with that one. But my mom's adobo, pancit. Let's go for dessert. Let's go for halo-halo. And whatever else we can put out there. I wouldn't say that it's a challenge. Mostly because I don't know any different. So I really wouldn't say that there was a big challenge that I would think was difficult. It was just more that there were differences that I knew my friends didn't have to deal with, that I had. But again, at the same time, there's also a lot of great stuff that comes along with that. You get to hear the stories that you have of them growing up in a different culture in a different country. Actually, I remember when I went to go see my family over in New York back in August, my dad telling some of the old stories again that he would tell me, but this time making sure to, kind of discreetly pull out my phone so I could record some of those, so that we would have them and that my kids could hear them, and later on we can revisit how Lolo learned how to swim by going to a river and using carabao as a diving board. So different things like that, and just knowing that uniqueness that comes along with it is also sticks with me more than I would say challenges. A lot of appreciation for diversity is the biggest thing, of not necessarily making assumptions. Remembering my dad telling a couple of months ago with my kids was growing up in the Philippines during the Japanese occupation in World War II, being an elementary school student, and how he and my aunt and uncle, when they were younger, would go to school and they would have to sing the Japanese national anthem. When he would get up in the morning, he and his brother would be watching dogfights, as in, not dogs, as in that, but actual airplane combat. When I think about that perspective and what my family has been able to accomplish here, how appreciative I am of that type of hard work and persistence through the culture when I think about all of the background challenges that they've faced as well. All of the above. So I would say that it does help me with, tough times because again, I think about challenges that I might have, and then I think about, my aunt telling me stories about walking down the street when she was a kid and seeing people just get punched and kicked down because they wouldn't bow to a Japanese soldier. I have a lot of privilege here, whereas a lot of my family basically had to simply get out of the country when Marcos came to power, and that's how a lot of people, how a lot of my family ended up coming over here from the Philippines. Yeah, it just makes me feel very proud that that is a part of my culture. It also makes me feel very proud that I'm able to pass that culture on to my own kids. For my son's, I want to say, second grade school picture, he wore a barong for his school picture. My daughter's senior honors project for high school is all about the history of Filipino dress and different things like that. So a lot of those things really, are the things that stick with me and that I can feel very proud of, that I do draw a sense of pride from Filipino culture, and especially a sense of pride from being able to pass that on to my kids. When it came to a lot of traditional practices, especially in my family, a lot of that kept around food. So there were always the big holiday gatherings with food and traditional Filipino food, of course. Arroz caldo on New Year's Eve was always a big thing. We have pictures of me as a teenager with my head next to the lechon on the table. When I was in college, like really getting into Filipino dance and learning how to do tinikling and other dances as well. And also now, in retrospect, being incredibly thankful that it wasn't a time where cell phones and cell phone video was a very prominent thing. I will put a lot of my upbringing and the culture of persistence into being able to successfully do this job. As in, it's an incredibly rewarding job, so don't ever get me wrong on that, but it's also at times not a very easy job. And it can be difficult when it just comes to the amount of work to do and the amount to handle and to juggle. But I've also learned through my family's struggles, through my own upbringing, how to be persistent when pushing through those types of things. I wouldn't say that I really have. Simply, if we're talking about due to identity and that type of thing, I really wouldn't say that there have been a lot, or at least nothing that I have noticed. But again, the challenge that I like to try to help through is being at an institution in West Michigan where there's not a huge population of, let's say, Filipino Americans or even Asian Americans, just kind of letting know people that, hey, I'm here. And, being a resource for anybody who just wants to connect on that front. I would say for most of my life, I have been able to. There have been times where things have kind of waned a little bit when I became incredibly, let's say, career focused. Growing up, what I had was my family. Growing up, and that was the biggest, Filipino community that I had. There weren't a lot of, other Filipino kids in my school. College, that's when I really, I would say, became a little bit even more immersed in my own Filipino community, because I remember being part of the Asian orientation there and going to events with that. And I remember the Asian American building on campus was called the Start House. It was like this little house on campus where a lot of different cultural organizations would meet, and people would even live there and all of that. And I remember being there my first year and talking to some of the people there, and of course asking what's your ethnicity, and mentioning that I was Filipino. One of the reactions that I remember was like, ooh, there's not a lot of Filipinos on campus. Well, there aren't many of us here, but we're going to make ourselves known. We started the Tufts Filipino Culture Society. And it was really one of the best times that I remember in college. And one of my fondest memories was the tinikling off that we would have with other universities, where we would kind of put the more modern twist on tinikling. I would make sure to keep with it. As in, making sure that my kids were pretty much immersed in their Filipino identities, and that's still being a big part of them. Still being connected with my family. And then, again, I have to give a special thanks to all of you for really pulling me back into this with FASA And when I was presented with the opportunity to be faculty advisor, I think I've told the story more publicly than directly to you, but I was practically in tears when I found that, just because I thought, it's like, this is going to be great. I love the idea of this.